And I'm just going to jump right into this. And our biggest objective for today is we're going to try and demonstrate some key new features of what we're calling iTree Eco version 6. We're going to try and keep this as much a demonstration as anything, so I'm not going to talk for a whole lot at the beginning here. But I'm going to highlight a few of the key new features, things that you should keep an eye out for as we go through some of the demos, and Al will walk through popping open iTree Eco version 6 and showing you how to set up a project. We've done a lot of work to add in some new reporting features, and Allison will walk us through those, and then we'll circle back and Alexis will talk about some of the newest science that we've gotten into iTree Eco version 6 with this forecast module, and I'll do a quick demo of that. For the folks that have never heard of iTree Eco or aren't sure exactly what we're talking about, iTree Eco is software that helps you estimate the structure, function, and benefits provided by the urban forest. But it starts with a field-based assessment, so you go out there and you measure trees, either in plots or by doing a complete inventory. And this is really our flagship software. All the latest science tends to make it into iTree Eco first, and then it sort of trickles down to some of the other iTree tools, and hopefully you'll see some of that today. It was originally developed for assessing the whole urban forest, and this would be a pretty labor-intensive process of putting out a couple hundred circular plots randomly located, but it's been adapted for individual trees, and a lot of the new reporting features have to do with some of that individual tree and complete inventory reporting. And beyond that, the ultimate goal is that we're going to go ahead and report the structure, function, and value based on those field measurements. So that's really my one-slide summary of iTree Eco. I don't think I can do it any shorter than that. We're not going to talk a whole lot about the science behind iTree Eco today, but a lot of that is on the website. So if you go to itreetools.org, one of the tabs on that website is this resources tab, and there's a whole lot there that'll lead you through some of the methods behind iTree Eco and how to implement your own iTree Eco study. And just to highlight a few of those, that video learning, something new we're working on that a lot of people have found useful. In the archives, we have a lot of the scientific papers summed up, and that in the archives there's even some new documentation for this iTree Eco version 6. So if you're interested in any of that sort of stuff after we're done with the webinar here, a lot of it is already up there, and I think Al may show a few of those resources as well. So just to highlight some of the newest things in iTree Eco, and these are some screen grabs, and you'll see the real thing in action here in a minute, but we spent a lot of time on a new user interface. It's hopefully a lot more user-friendly, and it definitely looks a lot nicer. We've also added in things like multiple years of hourly pollution and weather data, so you can select what years you want to use of that local data, so you're not stuck with 2005 is what we had in Eco version 5. Now you can go up through 2013 and select weather years that you're most interested in. We also have simplified and new data collection options, and this is one of the biggest changes from previous versions of iTree Eco. You can actually get through an iTree Eco report just entering species and DBH for your measured trees. A few other highlights. This expanded reporting, I think, is just going to add a lot of flexibility to what you can do with iTree Eco, and Allison will highlight some of those actual reports. We also have the forecasting capabilities, and we'll talk about that too, but so you can actually project the growth and the change in benefits over time for the forest and for the trees that you enter from your field data. And we've also added in automated processing. We've had it for the US, Australia, and Canada, and we're adding in UK with this new update as well. So that's definitely something worth highlighting and something we're excited to get out there. And so just to sum up where we're at with getting this version 6 out into the hands of users, right now we're doing model validation, so we're making sure that what comes out of iTree Eco version 6 matches up with previous versions and that the models are working correctly. We're still doing some internal testing, and we've released it to a limited set of selected beta testers. So we have ongoing debugging, and we're responding to some of that initial feedback, and we've gotten some great feedback so far, and we're adding in things like an easier way to do inventory importing, and that's been in response to some feedback we've gotten. So these next steps, this wider beta release should be happening really soon after this webinar in the next few days or weeks. We're going to incorporate some of that feedback and get to the full release sometime in the coming months here. So we're pretty excited to show you this all today, and we're going to stop for questions somewhere in the middle here, and hopefully we can get you up to speed with what's going on and get you excited about iTree Eco version 6 as well. With that, I think I'll go ahead and pass it off to Al if you want to go ahead and show some of that project setup stuff, Al.
Sure thing. One of the things I did want to mention, what I'm going to do now is just kind of do a very brief walkthrough. So this by no means is meant to be instructional. When you first launch iTree Eco version 6, it will bring you to more of an information page. And so this is somewhat of the landing page the first time you open this up. And you'll see this What's New screen too, which will kind of just highlight some of those same features that Jason talked about, the expanded functionality, additional weather and pollution, and then some other differences that it doesn't support the PDA old application anymore. We're going to the mobile data collection system. The very old NLCD information that we used to use actually in U4 and some of the earlier versions of ECO is no longer supported. And we're also not reporting on particulate matter less than 10 microns, so just PM 2.5. So it just gives you a quick synopsis here. And it also mentions too, and this might be important for folks who are considering using or currently working on a project, is that iTree Eco version 5 will still be available also. So you'll still have access if you're working on a project with 5, that's available to you continuously, and you can easily migrate a project into version 6 by simply launching 6 and then selecting to open up that version 5 project, and it will then run through a series of updates and create a copy. So you'll still have your old version 5 project, and then you'll have a new version 6 project which will have to be updated. So you'll have those options, that'll all be there. What I wanted to do though is kind of just also talk about these real quickly. So you do have a number of resources here. And so this is kind of the entry point, and we want to let folks know that we'll probably be making a ton of videos once we have a version of Eco 6 that we feel is somewhat in a state where it's not going to change on us, so we can start pounding out some videos to kind of help people along with a number of the resources that Allison has really done a tremendous job of putting together. And I'm going to slide in another web browser, and these are actually already available. So if you go to the iTree website under resources, manuals, and workbooks, we have a number of those that we're starting to populate, but these are still subject to change. You can see here, in addition to just a general user's manual, we broke out some of these into other categories. So we have a field manual. What we found is users were telling us that we were just grabbing a certain amount of pages from the actual user's manual and giving those to field crews. So we tried to kind of meet folks halfway with that process. There's manuals and guides that'll help you with stratifying projects, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of these here, and there'll probably be more in the future. So there's a lot of resources that we're starting to populate on the website going forward, but some of these are still a work in progress. So what I wanted to do now is just kind of walk you through this a little bit. One of the things when you actually go to open up a project, you have the option initially of just either an inventory or a sample project. So that is somewhat the same as what you would have in Eco version 5. In the future, we'll be adding in, picture this as a phased release. So this initial release will have sample option, and then we'll have the complete inventory option. And then in the future, we'll be adding in a re-inventory option. And that'll be for folks who have done a number of Eco projects or U4 projects in the past, like Sacramento Tree Foundation, Casey, City of Oakville come to mind. And they already have completed 3 of these. And in the future, they might want to go back and bring in that data and just update the existing data. So that's something that's still in the works. And then also the ability to do a project that is going to be street tree oriented. So another one of the ideas with this is this version of version 6 is that you'll start to see elements from iTree Streets in here. So folks who are familiar with iTree Streets we're starting to migrate some of those functions into iTree Eco version 6. So that's, again, that's a phase process. So at some point we'll have to have that fully supported and capable so you can actually migrate your streets project into version 6, and going forward you'll have access to some of these additional functions such as using forecasts. So what I did is, just to kind of save a little bit of time since we're trying to go through a whole lot, is I set up some of the parameters just for a very simple project here. So this menu option here is very new for folks who have worked with the old Eco version. We tried to somewhat fashion it after the way Microsoft works. So you have drop downs here, and these change as you page through. And generally we move from left to right, and that's just seemed to be a natural progression. So the first part would be starting off in your project definition. And what you'll notice here is that we just have some basic parameters: project name, a series. This is just something I set up to do a quick pilot test. Your inventory type. You didn't see me do this at the beginning to save the initialization step, but I chose to do a sample project here. And then you would just thumb through these tabs. So I have this pre-populated, and when I chose the city of Elmwood Park, which is just my neighbor to the west, it then filled in the population. One of the things that you'll notice too, as I change this, we also have this now, it's a dynamic help panel. So if you want information on some of these data fields, this is here on the side. You can collapse this or expand this. And if you just hit this again, it'll reconfigure everything. So this is something that we try to do just to kind of help people make those decisions. So this is something new right here, is the urban areas, or is the study area urban. And this has to do with pollution modeling. Well, what is urban? And if you go down here, it gives you some information telling you that it's based on population density of 500 people per square mile. So there's some tools here that are integrated in that will, hopefully help folks with the decision-making process. One of the other features here is that when you select these years, and this is only available for the US right now, in the past you were limited to working with 2005, so regardless if you did a project in 2014, you were really just using 2005 weather and pollution data for that assessment. Folks that did international projects would provide their own data, but now you have expanded options here. And this actually changes too. So depending on the year that you select, you may see more or less weather stations. So again, the idea with this here is giving people that ability to use more local data to see how their tree resource is interacting with local air pollution and local weather data. So that's the idea behind trying to integrate some of the streets options for streets users who are now using some of the data that is somewhat outdated. So that's location information. And then data collection options. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this feature here because this is fairly important. So this is kind of the decision-making panel here. So as Jason mentioned, one of the things that we did is we built a whole lot of flexibility into Eco version 6. So you can do this with a minimal amount of data. If I scroll down here, you'll see that it comes in with species and DBH as a minimum. I clicked on a couple extra boxes here, and for a plot-based project, you also do have to at least provide the percent of the plot that was measured and the percent tree cover in that plot, but you don't have to do all these other features. So we try to give some folks some recommendations. So, with freedom comes that responsibility of making decisions, and that could be a little bit challenging. So we actually, you have your minimum, which are in red. We have the highly recommended data fields, which we have in blue. And keep in mind, we're not discussing so much the science of Eco, but this is a tool that really is based on functional leaf surface area. So all these data values like tree height, crown size, crown bole height, and percent missing, crown light exposure, those go into a lot of the modeling procedures. So on the side panel here, there's a couple things that will help you with that, with some of those decisions. So what we're trying to do here in this side panel, if you were trying to consider, well, what should I fire up here? This will tell you which ones of these particular data variables affect a certain kind of output. So if you're really just interested in, say, carbon sequestration and storage, you could thumb through here and you could see that, okay, species affects carbon, DBH affects carbon, land use, tree height, and fire up those particular variables. So we have students sometimes that are just interested in one specific ecosystem service. So you'll have that flexibility in there. If the other thing is that we have some resources too that discuss that. So Allison put together a guide on the data limitations. And so this is just a little bit more of an expanded explanation. So what happens if you do a project and you only select species and DBH? And in many cases, that information is going to have to be filled in the background. So there are going to be default conditions that will be applied, and it's going to use regression equations based on the DBH and species to fill in, say, an average canopy height, bowl height. So it may or may not be accurate. So we will always encourage folks to collect more data if possible, but the idea with this flexibility is that you may not have that option, or say if you are a consultant and you have clients, you now can give them different degrees of complexity to do a project. So you might be able to do something a lot quicker, more cost effective, schools. So I think it's a good thing, but there is some responsibility to kind of spend some time making these decisions. That's all I can advise you on this one. It's a busy panel. We explain these data fields actually at the bottom too. So if you want to know what any one of these mean, that's all down here too. So there's a lot here. When you get this in your hands, spend a little bit of time and then use the resources to help you through that decision-making process. One of the other things I did want to mention too, so as I said, you'll start seeing some of the elements from iTree Streets. So management fields, I just fired up utility conflict. That's something that's migrated over from iTree Streets. And for you folks who are familiar with iTree Streets, this is our version of the optional 1, 2, and 3, where you can actually build in customizable fields. So we have this available also, and I'll show you just what this looks like. These may not pertain to a sample project, maybe more so for an inventory project, but it's more for just demonstration purposes. So what I did is I just committed those data changes there, and I'm back up at the top now. And so we just went through project definition, and you'll see these other data field options up at the top. These are all the same from the old version of ECO, the land cover, or the land use, and the ground cover. In future versions, we will build an option so folks can make this or add their customizable land ground covers and so forth. But right now we have to work with some of the hard-coded values that we have. One of the other things that we have, condition will also be customizable. So if you recall from previous versions of ECO, it works strictly with percent dieback, and you basically just made an assessment and entered in that percent dieback. It was fairly cut and dry, but highly subjective. It's very much the same way. It's based on the percent dieback, but in this version of ECO, it's the condition that we're actually entering. So if I felt there was about 5% dieback, the condition would be 95, 99, and this correlates to a condition of good. So again, this is setting the stage for folks who work with iTree Streets, where you have just a variety of different condition codes that folks use. So this will be more of a functional type interface that you can actually modify in the future. And so you also have these other options too that I mentioned. So these are customizable. This one I just set up for utility conflicts. So these are migrated over from iTree Streets, but they are certainly customizable. And if you turn on one of those optional fields, in this case, I was just using an example of wood utilization potential. So again, just to show and demonstrate how this actually could work. So that's all the data definitions and setting up a project. The other thing we didn't do is actually set up plots for this project. So this version, i3 version 6, still has the same option. So if you create plots externally using an ArcGIS, there's procedures for that we have on the website, which will show you how to create the files and actually walk you through the step-by-step procedures to create those text files and bring them in here. You could also just manually make this up. If you folks remember in ECO, this was called a map land use function, just making up a strata or map land use and then defining the size and adding plots. Or we have the Google Maps interface, which is probably about the easiest way and the one I like best. If you have a shape file, you can use that and bring that in here, or you can actually just simply create one on the fly. And I'll just walk through this real quick. Elmwood Park. So it's just a matter of going to that location and outlining the area. Standard plot size for ECO is 1/10 acre, so that's roughly about a 37-foot radius circle, but you can customize that too. We have folks who change that depending on the type of project they're doing. Generally, we recommend 200 plots for, say, a typical city, but that can vary, and there's a lot that we can discuss in actual project setup, and that's kind of one of those common questions. I will say that Jason has a really helpful forum post on how to do some pre-sampling with a pilot project if you want to actually try to get close to desired accuracy of your estimates. So generally that 200 plots for a city project is going to get you within plus or minus, I should say, 10 to 12 standard error on some of the population estimates. In this case, I'm just going to generate 10 plots. And you can see that it randomly locate those 10 plots in that area of interest. Once I hit OK, it's going to shut this down. And so we generated plots, set up our data. If I hit strata and zones, you'll see that this then updated that size of that study area, and there's my number of plots. And I'm just going to hit OK if I wanted to change the actual strata description from urban to city or whatever that may be. You can stratify these too, so you can actually make up, if you wanted to do it, say, by management zones, or if the city was broke up in aldermanic wards, you can do that too. It's a little bit more involved with creating the project. And so we have that. So we have that all set up, and the last thing I kind of wanted to quickly show you is to submit this to a mobile data collection device. I'll just do this real quickly. If folks aren't familiar with this process, this is what we've tried to move to help facilitate the use of smartphones and tablets. So this is more of a system of using web forms for data collection. It works with web browsers, and what this is doing here is it's taking my project configuration and it is sending it up to a server, and what's happening is I then get an email, and I'll launch that. And so it has a hyperlink, and so this data link is unique to my project, and that would be what you would share with your data collector. So if Jason and Allison and Alexis were helping me, I would send them that hyperlink. They would open that up, say, on an iPad, and this is what it would look like. And so I'll just try to walk through this very quickly. give you an idea of what this looks like. These are forms, and so this is very simplified from traditional ECOs because I've only turned on a few of the items. I don't have to collect too much information to move through this. Normally you would have 12 different variables for trees alone, and in this case I only have a couple that I fired up here. So I'm adding trees, general information. And I fired up condition and size. And the DBH information. I have some of those management info options that I had available, and then we save that. Plot would be marked complete, and so it's green, which indicates that that's complete. And then I send this data back to the server. And so if that were in the field, the project manager could come back to the project and now would have the ability to retrieve data from the mobile collection. So this is really just kind of a three-point system. And so now it's showing that that data was submitted, and I could go ahead and retrieve that. And if we go to the actual data field, this is a bit different too. So I clicked on plots here. This looks more like a spreadsheet. Down at the lower left here, I have land use information and trees. So if I fired up shrubs in my initial configuration, I would see shrubs also, or reference objects. Again, that was optional now, so I made this very simple so that we can move through this quickly. But you can see here that this was the data that I just entered on the mobile data collection forms, and I can make some modifications here, or I can actually add in files manually. So that's the data collection system. So it can be done manually, or it can be done using those web forms. And after that's completed and you run through the process, if you do an inventory, it's actually much easier because you don't even have the plot variables to deal with. But I wanted to at least show you some of the more some of the additional features associated with plots. One last thing before I wrap this up is that you do have those options to customize the benefits, and this is another new option that's migrated over from Streets. So folks who are interested in doing cost-benefit analysis will have that ability to enter in costs. So say for a city where you have public and private, this might not be as applicable, but in some cases, if you were doing, say, a park system or something, or a private property, or all public lands or something, you could actually start including some of your costs in there to get the cost-benefit ratio. So that's something that's similar for our from iTree Streets that will be available to folks too. So once data is all set up and passed through the system, it would still need to be submitted externally for processing. So that's one of the things that we still need to work on with version 6. We were hoping to have a version that could do desktop processing, but that has proven to be a little bit more challenging. That still is definitely a goal. But right now you would submit this, it would send your packet off to a server where it would be processed automatically. For folks who are not in the US, Australia, Canada, or the UK, there's still a 2 to 6 month timeline for processing, but otherwise you'd receive results back typically, say, within 2 hours or so, and you would receive a zip file where you would enter that here, and it would download the results, and then you would have access to the reports menus. So right now you can see that that's all grayed out because I didn't process this, so I'm not going to walk us through that step. I'll turn it over to Allison, but right now, Dave, I think I wanted to kind of take a quick break just to see if there's any quick questions so Allison can get set up.
Yeah, okay, and I got another question that just came in. It asked, does the data collector support asynchronous or offline data collection? Can I add, that's one part of it. And then can I add custom tree species like in streets? And do the stratum climate zones still have a role?
So with that mobile data collection system, that works with HTML5. So it is possible. You have to have connectivity initially to pull in that hyperlink. But once you have that, it works by caching data. So if you have those forms in there, and if folks, I didn't mention that, but if you have those forms in there, if you hit the notes on the lower right center panel, you'll see a couple links, and you can actually open up, you'll have to copy those manually and put them into a web browser. There's just 2 data collection links that'll give you an example if you want to try that on a browser. And so it caches that, so you can actually go offline and continue collecting data, but then you do need to regain connectivity to submit that data back to the server so it could be pulled in the desktop.
And Al, I'll put those on the resource page that I'll talk about at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, and as far as the streets climate zones, so we're moving away from that. So like, for example, if I were doing that Elmwood Park project in Chicago, I would be pulling data from Minneapolis, whereas I now have the option of pulling data from 3 local airports, 4 or 5. So the idea is that I can see how that resource is working with more local data. So we're trying to move away from some of those limitations that folks had from working with the regional model. So that won't come into play here with ECO. So when you bring in, like, we don't know what that looks like yet. That bridge hasn't been built, but that'll be something that we'll have to deal with, how to migrate the streets projects into ECO.
Okay, now we have time for one quick question while Allison boots up, because I have to give her I'm going to make her a presenter. But it goes, will ECO version 6 allow for consultants who collect ECO data using GPS units allowed to import using a template like the previous versions?
Yeah, that's a good question, and actually that is something that our developers have been working on, creating it's supposed to be a more simplified version. I haven't seen that for bringing in external data. So the version that I have doesn't have that, but we anticipate that being available soon, and that's kind of one of our priorities because we know that a lot of folks do projects that way too. So yeah, you will be able to use your data logger, and there will be a methodology to bring your external data into ECO.
Okay, good. Those are the questions that we have right now. Allison has joined us, but I can't get her, I cannot promote her to a, I'm having difficulty finding her on our list of people here to promote her to a presenter.